This video is about water application methods. In irrigated landscapes, your methods usually include sprinkler or spray irrigation, bubblers, or drip. There are other methods like flooding and furrowing that are more appropriate for agricultural situations that are not covered in the study guide. Spray or sprinkler irrigation is overhead. They either pop up or they're mounted on permanent risers in the landscape, and they're great for broadcasting a lot of water over a large area. So they're best for grass or mixed plantings. It can be pretty uniform if it's done right, but there's a lot of factors to consider, like wind speeds, the topography, and how quickly the water is soaking into the ground. It's best to run sprinklers in the morning when it's less windy and not as hot, so that you're not losing as much water. It also lets plants dry off throughout the day. It's a good option because it can rinse off dust, which actually promotes certain insects like spider mites. It can also reduce the air temperature in the surroundings. If you've ever walked by a lawn or a patch of grass in the summer, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's also a lot of negatives. Since the water comes overhead, when the water droplets hit the ground, they splash up particles of soil and break down the soil structure. When the small particles land back on the soil, they can start plugging up the smaller holes. So it's going to be harder for water to soak in the future. If the spray hits a tree trunk directly, that can lead to trunk rot, and having moisture in the canopy can lead to certain diseases like powdery mildew. If the irrigation is really superficial, it's also going to promote shallow roots, which is going to be problematic if you ever have to shut off the irrigation or if you have a drought situation. The roots will not have tapped into the water that's deeper in the soil. If you use wood chips as mulch, it is not going to be compatible because the wood chips are going to absorb a lot of that water that you're applying. And unless you're properly adjusting the application rate, there tends to be a lot more water that's put down. And unless you have your programming together, the application rate tends to be higher than what the soil can absorb. The next method is drip irrigation, where you have tubing that either has holes at specific distances, or you have individual smaller lines with emitters coming directly to the plant. It's better for small plants or widely spaced plants, and it doesn't waste a lot of water because it's delivering the water right to the root zone. The drawbacks are that the emitters and the holes can clog, or the tubing can be chewed up. Since it also wets a small area, the roots may just stay there and not spread out as much, which is a problem in drought situations. On a temporary basis, you can use something like a soaker hose, which has a lot more holes, and you can connect it to a garden hose. You can pull it out and put it at the drip line of the tree. You can move it in different areas to cover more of the root zone. You can water for as long as you want, as long as you keep it at a very slow drip so you don't have any runoff. Of course, the drawback to this method is you have to manually pull it out and move it around. So for lazy people like myself, it's kind of hard to do this method. You do also have to put it away after you use it, otherwise your dog might chew it up. Another method that's commonly used for trees are bubblers. These are designed to flood the surface of the soil with water, which then soaks into the ground. It's kind of a moderate or fast application rate because of the flooding. This is commonly specified for new tree plantings, and you might have to put in a berm to hold that water right over the root ball. It's a good method for planting beds and in situations where you have hardscape around the plants. The issue with this is that oftentimes bubblers are placed right at the trunk, so they'll constantly wet the trunk and lead to trunk rot. Often these are put inside sleeves or pipes so that the water just drains right to the bottom underneath the root ball. You might have some water getting soaked up in the root ball, but you also have a saturation layer where you don't have oxygen and roots aren't going to want to grow into. You really want it to come up from the top so that it can soak in. Regardless of the method that you're using, there's a couple of best practices to improve the system for trees. In general, you want to make sure that you're watering less often, but for longer periods so that the water can get deeper. That encourages roots to grow deeper, and it improves their drought resilience because they can tap into moisture that's further down in the soil. For something like overhead irrigation, this may mean cycling your irrigation so it turns on for a short period, then it turns off and lets the water soak in, and you repeat that a couple of times so you're not wasting water and having it run off. You also want the irrigation to shift closer and closer to the drip line as that tree matures, because that's where the small absorbing roots are growing. And if you ever need to reduce the amount of water you're putting in your landscape, do it gradually so that the trees can get used to it instead of being shocked.